welcome to episode 6 of Innovative People's Podcast, the podcast that is bringing attention to innovators and creators in our community. As usual, we aim to motivate and inspire you. If someone on here has done it before, you can do it too. I'm joined by Lamar Francois, a photographer who tells stories of creative people and brands through his lens. Welcome to the podcast, Lamar.
Hi.
And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and any early interests you had in photography?
So a bit about myself. As introduced before, I'm a commercial photographer, and what I do two things. But what I do commercially tends to be making photographs that tell the story of people in the arts and heritage sector mainly, but also in business as well. So I do a lot of candid photography, sort of storytelling through capturing sort of small candid moments that sort of illustrate and bring to life people's personality, people's vision, and give their audiences a sort of insight into the work that they do. I also have an interest in photographing cities and urban landscapes, particularly after dusk and at night. That's something that I've been taking photographs for about 15 years, and I've been working full time as a photographer about 2 years now. There's a story behind why it takes a long time, but that's probably something we'll talk about later.
So for those first 13 years that you were doing photography, what else were you doing besides that?
Firstly, I started taking photographs when I was 18. I was a student at the Uni of Nottingham, studied mathematical physics, and I think leading up to then, I was always quite curious about photography, and I sort of began to sort of experiment a bit with mobile phone photography and sort of combine it with another interest of mine, which is computers and gaming hardware, that sort of thing. So just taking small photos of, say, a gaming PC I'd put together at the time. And then I went to university, and at the University of Nottingham there was a student union. I've got many societies. There's a photography society, and I sort of helped sort of manage the kit, and that meant that while other people weren't sort of using it, I got the chance to got the opportunity to sort of practice and borrow the kit and sort of learn and develop my own vision along the way.
So you found that sort of creativity through the university to join the society?
Yes, it sort of enabled it, but I think I was just sort of curious about it anyway.
Okay.
I came to sort of study maths and physics because I was always very sort of academically inclined at school. It was what I was good at, and to an extent, it's the logical side of it does appeal to me a lot. And even as a commercial photographer, a lot of it is about problem solving. So I'm glad to have had that physics background, but I think it got to a point where rather than trying to understand, say, Einstein's theory of relativity, I was more interested in sort of developing my own ideas than trying to get into the heads of other sort of people that came up with very interesting and very sort of unique ideas. So I'm glad I studied physics. It's a really good subject to look at uni. It teaches you so much about how to sort of think about things, how to conceptualise. It's really, really useful.
How do you blend your mathematical physics with photography? Because they seem to be, to me, they're very different, like opposite ends of the spectrum sort of things. Like one's very methodical when you work through it, and the other seems to be very creative. How do you blend the two together?
The creativity part of it is very, very useful, but it's sort of, the way I tend to work is I tend to be very, very methodical at the same time. And maybe I'll try, for example, say if I see a scene, I'll probably try 3 or 4 angles, 3 or 4 sort of different sort of exposures, sort of different shutter speeds, and sort of like playing around quite a bit, and just sort of iteratively sort of learning, sort of developing on what you did best, what worked best, what didn't work. And the other aspect of it is that photography is physics, plain and simple. So something that I think those of you who might have studied a bit of photography will know about the inverse square law, for example, where a flash has power. If you halve the distance, it will double the power, it will double the amount of energy. if you sort of move further back by half, it sort of falls off by a quarter, or it goes to a quarter of the power, and that is physics. And that sort of behaviour is explained by physical laws.
Yeah.
Might slightly, not sure if I 100% got that explanation right, but using those ideas about sort of, for example, light fall off means that I can sort of think about how much power do I want on a flash, how far do I want it, and these are things that a lot of photographers will know, but they might not. But it's quite cool to sort of understand why these things sort of come about in the first place. So,
is photography for you, and being able to work out the different exposures and lighting, is that rewarding to you to work independently and not having to, follow someone else's rules they set in like a workspace?
It is. It is. It's always good, even though cameras now and the technology is very, very good. When I was, I think it sounds. It's like when I was sort of studying photography, when I was studying physics and learning photography on the side, the cameras at the time, they had auto exposure, so they had meters in them that can calculate what the exposure is. Now there's cameras that can do face detect, that can do all sorts of things. It can also sort of work out how to edit and develop a file. But even though there's so much automation, it's still very important to sort of understand the manual sort of principles behind it, because an automatic tool, even with AI, isn't always going to give you 100% results. Mm-hmm. It's not always going to be what you want, and you kind of need to understand how it works.
Yeah.
And the edge case where it doesn't.
Do you think being creative and doing that can help other people?
Absolutely. Helping the people in what sort of sense?
Can it help them come out of their shell? Can it help them, be more confident in themselves? Did photography help you in that way?
Absolutely. So a bit about myself. I'm neurodivergent. I'm autistic. Found that out during the final year of my university studies. But I think that's partly what also sort of drew me towards photography, because I sort of needed a sort of outlet and a way of expressing myself, and at the time I didn't have the sort of confidence to sort of maybe do it socially. So having being able to sort of like put a box around things and show people a vision, show people a window into sort of my thoughts and my thought processes is really, really useful, really helpful at the time.
COVID was only a few years ago. Obviously, I'm going to get asked the COVID question since it's so relevant. Did you find it hard to go out during COVID and be a photographer? Did you, because you were locked in? Did you find that tough? Did you?
COVID was a very interesting time, because I was sort of, because it kind of necessitated me to become full-time as a photographer, because I had another job that I had, which unfortunately I sort of lost right at the start of lockdown, probably about 4 years ago now. So it's good for me in that sort of sense. Creatively, though, it was kind of a little bit tough being in the same environment for a long time and sort of seeing the same things. And it was sort of like that for 3 or 4 months. At the time, I have other sort of interests. I'm massively into sort of computer games, so I did a lot of that. Although there is one particular computer game I did play that was sort of creatively inclined. It's a game called Eastshade and it's a game where you play as an artist, and you're set in this landscape, and you're going around sort of taking photos, or taking photos which would appear as like oil paintings on a canvas, and you sort of need to sort of take these photos of particular landmarks in the game world that is being put together to sort of advance the plot. So in a way,
do you think that helped at all with your real life work?
A little bit, but it's more sort of separate.
Yeah. Kept you entertained during lockdown. Keep us all from going a little bit crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Finally, my last question is: Do you have any other creative hobbies that you enjoy?
It's interesting because I've played around with pottery, a little bit, played around with potting wheels and stuff. I think a lot of my hobbies outside are probably slightly different. So I'm very interested in sort of computer hardware, following trends and stuff. But having multiple sort of creative hobbies can be quite useful because you can sort of follow the same sort of processes that you learn through photography, just with a different sort of medium. Say maybe it's drawing or say sketching. For me though, I think I've always had my creativity centred a lot around my photography. So I'm probably more inclined to follow other things and have other interests that I can sort of learn things from as well.
Cool. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Firstly, I'd just like to say your photography is incredible. The way you capture moments and tell stories through the lens is remarkable. Can you tell me about one photograph in particular and a story behind it?
Yes, I do. In fact, I have a photo in front of us right here. Actually, for those of you back at home will probably show the photo. But the photo I have here is one that I took at the end of a day filming or photographing with the National Justice Museum, who had commissioned me to take photos of. So a bit about the National Justice Museum. Their work is involved in bringing to life courtrooms and mock trials and things, and sort of bringing to life like the history of like the legal system. So set in a former sort of High Court in Nottingham. Their mission is, so they brought me in to take photos of their actors and their acting staff to be used as like marketing materials. So the photos that I did were to demonstrate the actors and to bring them to life and bring to life them as a family-friendly, welcoming, dynamic, exciting team and museum to visit. So this particular one I want to show you is two of the actors. So half of them were in Edwardian costumes, I believe, and the other half were in Victorian costumes. And this was sort of towards the end of the day, a bit of fun. We'd done all the photo shoots, and the idea was to sort of set them against each other in a sort of mock, sort of like in a sort of playful pantomime sort of scene. Yeah. So it's Edwardians versus Victorians. So we've got them all sort of like playfully play fighting with each other, having like a mock sort of play fight. And this one I particularly wanted to show because it just sort of, as an example, this is the sort of work that I do commercially, just photographing moments, really.
It captures all their expressions as well.
Yes. So to do this, I had this just coming towards the end of the day, so there wasn't a lot of light, so I used a flash and put it up on a softbox to sort of make that flash a bit softer, and it was just a case of sort of like trying to sort of hide the fact that I wanted it to look quite natural, so that's why I used the particular lighting setup that I did. Yeah. And sort of hide the fact that outside the light was fading quite a bit as well all the time. Yeah, and I'm quite happy with how it sort of came out, sort of capturing the details as well, and also got a bit of motion as well with I used a slightly shutter speed so you can see the lady with the cane. And just that sort of mix of movement and dynamic, and you can see the expressions in all the faces, so that's also good for the museum, good for their PR. The team that I worked with were absolutely overjoyed with the results. They're thrilled, really pleased with how it all sort of went through. And it's these sort of things that I just love, and
capturing those moments.
Yes, and those sort of things that people know me for, and people love what I do, and they keep using. So look forward to doing more of that in the future.
Are there any photographers that inspire your work?
When I was studying, I was lucky enough to know a motorsports photographer actually called John Rourke, who photographs a lot of stuff for Blank Pond Le Mans Motorsport, which also sort of links in a bit with my Formula One. So he sort of was very helpful, his sort of style and how he sort of approached things, particularly photographing motorsport, and what he did a lot was photograph the feel of motorsport. So when you take a photograph of, say, a car, for example, a lot of what he did was using sort of slow shutter speeds to sort of demonstrate the movement of the cars and the dynamics, like rather than just sort of taking a car with a very fast shutter speed, freezing it in motion, which is good which is useful in some senses, but it doesn't really give us
emotion.
No, it doesn't really give a sense of the feeling of motorsport, and that's something I've tried to sort of really sort of guide it into my work quite a bit. Try and make sure you capture the feeling of a situation, and it's not just a straight up just finding the right moments. So it's not just, you're not just literally just taking a snapshot.
Yeah. I also read that photography helps manage the effects of Asperger's syndrome and anxiety. Could you share a bit more how it helps you gain your confidence?
Yes, so like I said earlier, photography really helped me sort of just as a sort of avenue to sort of express myself. And a bit about sort of being autistic, I'm very sort of detail oriented, so having something that which also feeds into the work that I do, because a lot of it is about small sort of split second moments, and some of the stuff that I photograph you have to be able to sort of set your cameras up to react very quickly. To say, even in some of the landscape work that I do, when, for example, if you've got a sun that's setting, and sometimes the sun might be in amongst clouds. I was recently walking around Birmingham city centre a couple of weeks ago, or about a month or so ago, photographing around the BT Tower, that sort of area, and the day it was that it was quite sunny, but there was a lot of clouds, so the sun kept going in and out of the clouds, and sometimes when the sun sort of went up and the clouds disappeared, you probably have about 30 seconds to set a shot, so you have to sort of really get ahead of that and kind of anticipate that.
Yeah. I read that you work collaboratively with creative organisations. How did you reach out and make this happen?
So to go back to the previous question, a couple of things I wanted to say. So just having that sort of detailed eye sort of helped. I think being autistic as well, it helped. Having the joy of self-expression was really, really sort of vital to me. And it sort of, I think the thing about creativity that's sort of helpful is that the camera allowed me to be who you want to be. And that was the most sort of powerful tool about it, and that's the most important thing about crafting. So Gather that Skilled Hands does a lot of workshops with creativity, so in different sort of mediums, so not necessarily photography, but it might be, say, working with jewellery, for example. The importance of being able to having sort of materials and crafting them, it allows you to be that sort of space to be who you want to be, and that's a really, really vital thing to have. It's so yes, and to be who you want to be and be away from necessarily the boxes that we have to sort of fit into sometimes, who we have to be sometimes for certain people, for certain society. So that's the way which really helps me. Such.
Yeah. I read that you work collaboratively with creative organisations. How did you reach out and make this happen?
Yes, that sort of falls on what I'm saying. Like, while I enjoyed sort of being who I wanted to be as a camera, behind the camera, it was hard to then sort of realise that that's not enough to make a living. That's unfortunately, and I did a lot of work with the Prince's Trust, so I went through their Explore Enterprise programme back in 2017, because I worked for 4 or 5 years part-time, but I was sort of struggling to sell and to get clients for my work, because, like, I think I was good at the creative side, but what I didn't sort of quite realise was that there needs to be a bit more to it than just this sort of raw sort of creative output. There's got to be a sort of business model, and working with the Prince's just helped me sort of find what that business model needed to be that suits what I do, and it's not also overly constricting in the sense that what I do commercially is something I do enjoy doing. It's not like I have to make too much sacrifices sometimes, although I have had to make sacrifices and work in areas that to make a living that I might not have considered. But in terms of working with creative organisations, so people like, for example, the Royal Shakespeare Company, I've worked with lots of sort of business improvement districts, worked with people more locally in Nottingham, so people like City Arts. I do a lot of work with City Arts, also worked with sort of Lakeside Arts, a lot of these organisations. And First Art as well, based in Mansfield, as part of the Creative People and Places Network. How that happened? Sometimes you just have to sort of reach out, and it's a lot of reaching out. And there's a good story that I had, like, because one year there was the Nottingham Puppet Festival, which is also coming around again, but I was quite keen to photograph that, so I decided to make a point of finding out who's behind the marketing. So I did, and I got to speak to this person right at the event, fortunately. And at the time, we sort of exchanged business cards, and nothing came of it until about 15 months down the line, when I got an email out of the blue saying this person who's a freelancer, she'd now worked with First Art, and she said, right, we're setting up this whole thing, and we think your photography is a good fit for what we need to communicate, so we'd like to come in and talk. So I did. It came in. I've been working, and they've been one of the best sort of clients I've had working for the past 3 or 4 years.
Oh wow! So, yeah, that's really good.
You know, it's sort of hard because naturally I'm a bit of a hermit, and I like to sort of stay behind the camera, but at the same time there's opportunities to inspire people by talking about who you are and what you do, and how you do it, and it's just that connection that I think that's important as well. Mm-hmm. And also working with a business model. I gather a lot of people here will be sort of into craft businesses, so I can recommend a company called the Design Trust, run by a lady called Patricia Van Acker. She specialises a lot in helping people develop businesses around their creative craft, and her work particularly works with a lot of designer makers, a lot of crafters, so people who do jewellery or fine art or clothing or craft workshops. Like, that's something I'd really sort of recommend looking at in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the end of our podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much, Lamar, for joining me. We have 5 other episodes that have been uploaded, and we implore you to please go watch them and check out our links.